Good afternoon. Well, first of all, Mickey, let me join Henry and all of the other folks who have been up here at this podium in saying gracias, thank you to you for your leadership, for your mentorship of so many folks over the years, for the way that you have gone above and beyond to cultivate the next generation of leadership. Let's give Mickey one more round of applause for everything that he's done. I also want to thank Henry for being the trailblazer that he was and is. I know that my election here in San Antonio, and I bet Ed feels this way as well, Ed Garza, who served before me, wouldn't have been possible without Henry's example. And I see so many folks in the room, some of whom have been recognized already, some of whom have not, but we know who you are, who have made such a difference. Y'all have been trailblazers over the years and have created opportunity for the next generation to succeed. It's true that I'm still working on a memoir that seems to stretch out longer and longer. But it's almost done. But as you can imagine these days, I'm thinking a lot about my own family and especially about my grandmother. And I've said often that what a nation we would live in if folks from her generation and generations younger in the Latino community had been able to reach their own dreams. How many more beautiful novels would have been written, or Fortune 500 companies might have been founded, or cures for disease might have been discovered if they had had the opportunity that generations today have. So many folks in this room and those who have been honored over the years by the Latino Leaders Network have helped to move our country and the Latino community forward. And I count today's honoree, Alex Padilla, as one of them. Alex has both served as an example of the best of America and the Latino community, and also been a beneficiary of so much, like Joaquin and I have, of the work that has been done by previous generations. Let me begin by saying that the worst thing I can say about Alex is that he's a Lakers fan. Because everything else is great. In a time when there is so much cynicism about people in politics, and sometimes when you turn on the TV or get on the internet, it's for good reason. We may have one person particularly in mind. Alex is exactly what all of us want in a public servant. Somebody who is fundamentally honest, somebody who is dedicated to serving others and not himself, somebody who has a vision, somebody who is smart, who works hard, and who is focused on the future. He grew up in Pacoima, got an engineering degree from MIT, as Henry said, returned home and served on the LA City Council, and then became the council president in LA before he moved on to the state Senate and did great work there in California. And just a couple of years ago, got elected Secretary of State, the biggest state in our nation. And you know, I was thinking about this, Alex, that you may hold the record for getting more votes than any Latino elected official ever has in this nation, because you've gotten elected in the largest state in our country. Bill Richardson might want to quarrel with you, since I know he ran for president a few years ago, but I think Alex holds the record of getting more votes than any other Latino candidate ever in this country. And it says a lot. It says a lot because he's worthy of that. And the thing is that as Secretary of State, he hasn't just rested on his laurels. In a time when so many states are going in the wrong direction in terms of voter registration and really trying to suppress the vote, Alex has gone in the right direction. He has championed young people registering to vote. Recently, got through the legislature an initiative to pre-register 16 and 17-year-old Californians so that the moment they turn 18 in California, they're ready to vote. He's ensuring that voter turnout goes up in a very important state, and one that has so many Latino elected officials from the school board level all the way up to the statewide level. And Alex, I want to thank you for setting an example among your peers, one that I know that we can use in Texas. And as Gilberto Ocañas mentioned to me earlier, it's fitting that you're here in San Antonio, the home of Willie Velasquez and Southwest voter. I think that he would be very proud today to know of your work and to think about the future, both the future of the Latino community because of your efforts, the future of the country, the state of California, and also your future. Please help me give a big San Antonio welcome to a great friend who's here today with his lovely wife, Angela. They have 3 boys that keep them busy. But please help me give a great big San Antonio welcome to our friend, Secretary Alex Padilla.
Thank you, San Antonio, and thank you, Julián Castro. We had a chance to visit when he was Secretary of HUD in Washington, D.C. We had a fun dinner one night, and we kind of teased each other. He walked in, I said, "Good evening, Mr. Secretary." He said, "Good evening, Mr. Secretary." "Oh, no, Mr. Secretary, please." "Oh, no, Mr. Secretary, you first." Thank you for the very kind introduction. And I want to thank, as everybody has, Mickey Ibarra and the Latino Leaders Network for this recognition today and the opportunity to share my story with all of you. It is not my first visit to San Antonio, as you've heard, and it is great to be back in San Antonio. It holds a special place in my heart. I'm honored that we have with us Henry Cisneros, who I first met when there was a natural disaster that rocked Southern California, literally. He mentioned it, that 1994 Northridge earthquake. I remember going to a community meeting at the Pacoima Boys and Girls Club to listen to Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Henry Cisneros, talk to the residents about the federal aid that he was bringing. So you all know better than I, the whole country has benefited from the leadership of Henry Cisneros for a long, long time. And of course, a more recent Secretary of HUD who has graced us. Another former mayor of San Antonio, personal friend, who I met in 1999 at a National League of Cities conference in Los Angeles, Ed Garza. Thank you, Ed, for being here. And a special shout out to your newest member of the City Council for the 7th District, Ana Sandoval, who has brought her MIT education and experience to her hometown and into public service. And allow me to also introduce, everybody else has, because she's my better half, my beautiful wife, the love of my life, Angela. Thank you, baby. So let me also take a moment to share on behalf of the people of California, and frankly the whole country, our thoughts and prayers as Texas begins to recover and rebuild from Hurricane Harvey. Now, I know in calling many friends in San Antonio prior to the trip that San Antonio, for the most part, was spared from the impact, but I also know that a lot of people in this room have friends and family in other cities that were significantly impacted, their lives and their homes, and frankly, the same that's happening to our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. And I acknowledge these disasters, just like reflecting on the 1994 earthquake, because I see something else happening across the country too. I see our country, the people of our country, pulling together despite our president. I see people getting each other's backs. I see neighbors helping neighbors, regardless of race and regardless of immigration status. That is the America that I know. That is the America that I believe in. This award is an honor because of what it represents and just amplified by the list of prior recipients. And so to be listed among the many great leaders from our community over time, it's deeply humbling. The recipients that have come before me embody, as has been said, not just the best of Latino leadership, but the best of American leadership, because our stories are American stories too. And like many past honorees, my story also transcends borders. My father, Santos, came from Jalisco, Mexico in the 1960s to Los Angeles. He came with a first grade education. My mother, Lupe, came from Chihuahua. She was the lucky one. She got to go to school through the third grade when she also came to Los Angeles in the 60s. They came separately, each giving themselves a year to see if they could find work. They did, and in the process, they also found each other. They fell in love, decided to get married, and decided to apply for a green card. And I thank the United States government for saying yes. And after they established residency, they got married and settled into the San Fernando Valley to start and raise a family. I was raised, by the way, in Pacoima, California. So if you've ever heard of Richie Valens, or you've seen the movie La Bamba, then you know exactly where I grew up. My parents are both retired now. My father, after 40 years of working as a cook, for those same 30 years, my mom cleaned houses. So needless to say, it was a very modest upbringing. I grew up in a tough neighborhood at a tough time. Many of you will recall the plight in our country, especially in large urban centers. In the 1980s, Los Angeles was rocked by gangs and drug activity, and our community was not immune. It was not uncommon for us to look out the front window and witness drug dealing, prostitution, and violence. But I also remember one day, there was two neighbors who came from a couple blocks over, who we really didn't know, but we recognized. It was Efren Olvera and Vicente Fajardo. They were beyond frustrated. And I remember them talking to my parents in the living room and saying, if we as parents can't protect our own kids, what kind of parents are we? Because the political figures aren't coming around, the police department isn't responding, we have no choice but to do something ourselves. And so that's the day my parents became activists. They got involved organizing other neighbors, and they would drag us to the meetings every week in Mr. Fajardo's garage to share notes with the other neighbors about who belonged in the neighborhood and who didn't. And little by little, the city engaged, and we ended up cleaning up the neighborhood. And from then on, it was just volunteerism left and right. The phone would ring, and my mom would shove me off in a white van of some sort to go paint over graffiti, to go clean the park. Julián, is this sounding familiar? Volunteer at church. I honestly think it was my mom's keep them out of trouble plan. But we learned something in the process. We learned that if you want to see change in your community, you can't just wait for it to happen. You got to go make it happen. That wasn't my parents' only goal, though. Knowing full well, they were very cognizant that they were not blessed with the opportunity to get a formal education. They instilled the value of education, the importance of education in my brother and my sister and myself. They didn't just support us, they didn't just encourage us, they expected us to finish high school and go on to college. I can't tell you how many times I'd be in my room trying to get through my homework when my dad would walk in, tired from work, and he would tell me, "Mijo, cuando crezcas, quiero que trabajes con tu mente y no con tu espalda." So I tried to do well in school, I was not a straight A student, but somehow I did well enough that I was accepted to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Eddie Grado remembers. And I'll admit it, I was a little nervous about going back east to school. I personally had never been east of El Paso. But I packed all my worldly possessions into 2 tote bags and took a red-eye flight and landed in Massachusetts the day before classes started at MIT. As nervous as I was, I knew that to honor my parents' hard work and sacrifice, I had no choice but to go and to try to do my best. Well, 4 winters later, I came home with a mechanical engineering degree. And the year was 1994. Now, there's 2 significant things happening in California in 1994. Southern California especially was hit by a pretty big recession. Post-Cold War, Defense Department cutbacks, aerospace industry was contracting, and so holding on to that engineering job was a little tough. Politically, 1994 was the year that Proposition 187 appeared on the ballot. Now, for those who may not know California political history, let me put it this way. Before there was SB 4 in Texas, before 1070 in Arizona, there was Proposition 187 in California. It was a measure that sought to deny immigrants and children of immigrants access to public services. And depending on the lawyer you talk to, you remember this, Tom, it meant you couldn't go see a doctor in a county clinic when you didn't have insurance. Some read it as even our kids could not attend public schools. And up until that point, like a lot of young people, I was pretty cynical about politics and politicians. But when Prop 187 was on the ballot, I knew that my high school government teacher was right. I could either get involved in the political process, or I could sit back and let others make decisions that maybe were good for my community, or maybe they weren't. Proposition 187 passed in California. It wasn't even close. Despite the efforts, we had organized, we marched, we rallied, but when it came to the ballot box, we came up short big time. And that was not the California that I believed in. The courts soon ruled it unconstitutional, but the Prop 187 experience served as a big wake-up call, not just for the Latino community in California, but especially the Latino community in California. The sleeping giant was woke. We learned the hard way that if we didn't engage in the political process, we would continue to be targets. And so that's when I jumped in with both feet. People often ask how I've gone from engineering to politics. I actually think it's pretty logical. Engineers are trained to solve problems. Isn't that what elected officials are supposed to be doing? But with no political experience, but a lot of commitment and a hard work ethic, I went on to volunteer in political campaigns and manage some political campaigns. Tony Cardenas for a state assembly in 1996. Richard Alarcon for state senate in 1998, among others. That state senate race, where we were long shots, by the way, but we would keep winning. That Senate race created a vacancy on the Los Angeles City Council for the district where I was born, where I was raised, and where I was back home living. That's when I felt the calling to run and represent my hometown, my neighborhood. And it wasn't just my campaign. I was at the ripe old age of 25. The whole family, the whole neighborhood really came together. Neighbors volunteered, my mom cooked for volunteers, my sister made phone calls, my brother knocked on doors, but it was my dad who probably gave the most. See, right as I announced my campaign for city council, and anybody here who's run for office knows you don't get paid for run for office, my dad got laid off. Laid off by the restaurant owner who he had worked for 30 years. And as big of a shock as that was for the family, They said, nope, we made a commitment, we're going to support you. And my dad did not seek a job right away. He threw himself into my campaign. He would take the folders of the precincts that I would walk, and he would go back, and he was the one to put up the yard signs the next day and knock on the doors of whoever wasn't home when I came through the neighborhood. By the end of the election, months and months later, most voters had either met me or met my dad or met both of us. On election day of 1999, I had just turned 26, and I was elected the third youngest person ever to serve on the Los Angeles City Council. But I knew right away that my age was a concern to a lot of people. I mean, it's one thing in my district where we set out to organize and plant trees and install street lights and insist on more funding for parks and libraries and fire services and built the first new police station in Los Angeles in a generation. In my time there, we took my district from one of the highest crime rates in the city to the lowest. But at City Hall, I was serving with colleagues that greeted me with, "Oh my God, I have kids your age," or grandkids. In one case, it was, "I have been on this city council longer than you've been alive." So I knew I had to prove myself. I had my work cut out for me to be taken seriously as a peer and as a colleague, and not just some kid who might have gotten lucky in his election. Well, I think, after many policy debates and budget debates, that I must have proven myself, because 2 years after my first election, now I'm 28, I was elected city council president, the first Latino and the youngest member to be elected council president. And council president, usually you're setting the agenda, assigning committee chairs, that sort of thing. A couple months into my time as president, I remember getting a call one morning. A friend of mine woke me up, said, "Turn on the news. Something just happened in New York. You might want to check out what's going on." And so I did. And I saw smoke spewing from the World Trade Center. The news cut to the Pentagon as the Pentagon was hit. And then I saw a plane hit the second tower of the World Trade Center. It was September 11th. And in a split second, I remember that then Mayor James Hahn was actually in Washington, D.C., and as council president, I was acting mayor for the second largest city in America. And I remember seeing this little text scrolling at the bottom of the screen, 4 planes unaccounted for headed towards Los Angeles. So I scrambled to get myself ready, raced downtown, report to the Emergency Operations Center. And on 9/11 and the days that followed, I was busy. We were receiving intelligence reports, we're directing public safety agencies' response, and my task as acting mayor was also to try to calm an anxious public. So we had numerous press conferences for several days in both English and Spanish to try to tell Los Angeles that we were going to be okay. And one of my proudest moments was saying yes to a Los Angeles Fire Department urban search and rescue team that was the last plane to take off on 9/11, because they wanted to be on the ground at ground zero to help the folks in New York. I'm proud because it's another example of what we do when we're facing a national crisis. Our country comes together. In 2006, I was elected to the state senate and can go on about the health policy that we did, the education legislation that we are so proud of, the work we did in energy and telecommunications in so many areas. And it was during my time in the Senate that I also became involved with NALEO. Many of you know the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. And the mission of NALEO, right, it's to try to ensure Latino participation in the political process, from citizenship to voter registration and turnout and census and redistricting and on and on and on, insisting we have a seat at the table. And so today, I may not be as young as I used to be, but I'm proud to stand before you as the first Latino elected California Secretary of State. And as Secretary of State, there's a lot of important functions that we have. We process business filings in our agency. We have a campaign finance reporting obligation. I'm the custodian of the state's archives in California. But the most important part of my job is as California's chief elections officer. And having the responsibility couldn't come at a more critical time. Just look at what's happening around the country and right here in Texas. Reduction or elimination of early voting opportunities, aggressive purging of voter rolls, unfair voter ID laws, gerrymandering. Our voting rights are under attack, plain and simple. It's unacceptable, and it is contrary to our values as Americans. And so I begin my work with trying to have California become the counterexample. How do we make it easier for eligible people to participate? In the last cycle alone, we've added 2 million new voters to the rolls in the state of California. And we had a record turnout last November. There was no debate whether folks turned out or not. We had record turnout in California. And we're just getting started. Come April of next year, we will implement automatic voter registration in California and add 4 million more voters in the next 4 to 5 years. We're now allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote in California, so they're automatically on the rolls when they turn 18. And we're giving voters more options for how to vote, more flexibility in when, where, and how to cast a ballot. We're working to strengthen our democracy in California, while Donald Trump and Republicans are taking a jackhammer to the very foundation of our democracy. And like everyone in this room, I followed last year's presidential campaign pretty closely. I was offended at the misogyny and the bigotry that we heard from Donald Trump. Frankly, I was insulted by the anti-immigrant rhetoric I heard from several of the Republican candidates in the primary. For me, it was all too reminiscent of that political environment we had in California during the Proposition 187 debate. And like many Americans, I was stunned at the results on election night. It was in my office because I had, a secretary do the reporting and tallying of election results, and it was mixed emotions, to put it mildly. Right? We had just conducted a very successful election in California, but Donald Trump had just been elected president. And so I struggled through the various stages of grief, right? That emotional roller coaster in the days and the weeks after the election. And I thought, oh man, I need a break. Something that's going to be good for my soul is taking a few days over Thanksgiving weekend. And so we celebrate with family. We're thankful for our blessings. And on Sunday of that weekend, what was otherwise a quiet evening at home was interrupted by news of a tweet by Donald Trump, when he wrote, quote, "If you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally, I would have won the popular vote." And I thought to myself, oh God, if I get worked up over every nonsense tweet, we're in for a long 4 years. A few minutes later, he followed it up with another tweet. And he wrote, quote, "Serious voter fraud in Virginia, New Hampshire, and California." Our state was just called out. I was just called out. And we could not let his lies go unresponded to. So I worked up a tweet of my own. Called him on his lies, called his tweets reckless and unbecoming of a president-elect. And I challenged him to share any proof or evidence that they had to make these claims. As you know, he went on, to get sworn in January, and even as president, he's continued his claims of massive voter fraud. And I continue to challenge him to put up any proof or evidence he has. And to date, nothing. And I want to make something very clear to all of us in this room. When Donald Trump makes claims about millions of illegals voting, he's targeting us. He's targeting our community. He's targeting our children. I will not allow him to scapegoat or bully our family or our community for a second. So instead of providing evidence, what has he done? He creates this sham commission to look into voter fraud, made up of a who's who of voter suppression bigots in America. And it gets worse. Before this commission he sets up even met for the first time, they sent letters to every secretary in every state in the country asking for not just a list of all the voters in this state, but all of our personal information: name, address, social security information, military history, felony history, party affiliation, vote, on and on and on. My response was, hell no. I was the first secretary to say, no, we're going to refuse that request, thank you very much. By now, most secretaries have said no, either partially or completely. And while the commission has revised their request, we continue to say no. Secretaries of state are important. We are the first responders when it comes to attacks on our democracy. But it's incumbent upon all of us to be vigilant and to continue to fight back and to push back. Just a couple of months into the Trump administration, I remember, one of the lucky days when I get to drive one of my kids to school before going to work. And our oldest son, Roman, who's now 10, he was 9 at the time, back in about April, May, was a little down as he's eating his cereal before going to school, and usually he's full of energy. And so I asked him, Roman, what's going on, mijo? What's wrong? Dad, can Donald Trump take us back to the days of segregation? My heart dropped. What's going on in America today when 9-year-olds have to worry about this? And so I said the first thing that came to mind, like, no, mijo, that's why I do what I do. And then he perked up. You have that power? And I knew immediately I needed to manage expectations. And so I shared the next thing that came to mind. Like, well, Roman, not by myself, but when a lot of us work together, we can prevent bad things from happening. What I told him is absolutely right, and I think the spirit of this gathering today. When we work together, parents can organize and take their communities back from drugs and crime. When we work together, youth can fight discriminatory ballot measures and win. When we work together, we can elect people who truly represent us. And when we work together, we can pass legislation that makes people's lives better. When we work together, we can push back on injustice. Even when, especially when, the injustice is coming from the White House. Think about what this year has been. From a sham voter fraud commission, to a travel ban, to Charlottesville, to DACA, and the pardon of Joe Arpaio. The values of this president do not reflect the America that I know and love. The America I know respects all people and actually encourages civic participation. We can protect and expand the right to vote. The America that I know made it possible for the son of a cook and a house cleaner to attend MIT and serve as California's Secretary of State. That America may be under attack today in the eyes of many, but I'm always an optimist. I remain optimistic. I see the optimism in my parents still. I see the optimism in a post-Prop 187 California, and I see that optimism in this room here today because of all your commitment and all your work. And I know that if we continue to stand up for what we believe in, individually and together, that our kids will know the same United States of America that you know and that I know. Thank you, Mickey, for this incredible honor. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Stand right here. I want to present you with the Mr. Secretary, on behalf of the Latino Leaders Network, it's my honor to present you with our Eagle Leadership Award for your outstanding contribution to our community and to our country. The final luncheon event of the year will be in Los Angeles. November 16th, we'll be honoring Cheech Marin. That's right, up in smoke. Thanks to my event team. We have Norma Vega that's helped us, Jana Else, Christopher Guerrero, our entire team. Thank you, and thank all of you for showing up. That concludes our program. It's 2:03 for the record.